The Nintendo Switch has been out for over 4 years now, and it's no secret to anyone that it's been a resounding success, currently sitting at nearly 80 million units sold worldwide, not only crushing the infamously lackluster numbers of their previous console, the Wii U, which sat at measly 14 million units, but also becoming one of Nintendo's most successful consoles of all time, only behind the Wii, which currently sits at just over 100 million units. But there's a good chance that the Switch may pass it in due time and become their most successful console of all time. Due to the success and popularity of the console-handheld hybrid, many have speculated about potential future revisions of the Switch, specifically a mid-generation refresh with upgraded hardware similar to the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X in more recent times, and with what Nintendo did with their previous handhelds in the past, such as the Game Boy Color, Nintendo DSi, and the infamous new Nintendo 3DS. While this theoretical refresh has many names, most know it as the Nintendo Switch Pro, and with more and more rumors popping up as of late, I figured I might as well give my take on the Switch Pro and the potential options that I think Nintendo might go with, as well as what I personally want to see from the system. So with that being said, let's begin. First up is the display, a crucial component of the Switch of course due to its hybrid nature, which by all means at this point seems to be continuing with the Switch Pro. The display on the current Switch is a 6.2-inch 720p LCD, nothing fancy by any means at this point, but it also gets the job done just fine. But of course that doesn't mean people aren't clamoring for a better display, in particular a 1080p display, and I'm definitely in that camp as well. However, that may not be what we are getting, as according to this guy, whose name I won't say because I know I'll butcher it and I'll be bringing up this guy later, claims that the Switch Pro will be using a 720p 7-inch Samsung OLED panel, with Samsung planning to begin mass productions of said panels in June with a goal of around 1 million units per month, meaning that by the holiday season Nintendo would have more than enough panels to work with. This, if true, would be a bit of a disappointment for some, as everyone has just kind of assumed that we'd be getting a 1080p screen, but on the bright side it would still be an improvement over the current Switch due to the upgrade to OLED, which would bring much improved image quality, even if it's at the same resolution. If this is what we end up getting, I wouldn't be bothered too much personally, as I mainly play my Switch in docked mode anyways, but I'll admit it would be kinda weird for a Switch Pro to still have a 720p display, even if it is upgraded. Hopefully we will still end up getting a 1080p display in the end, but if we don't, it won't exactly be the end of the world for me either. Ah yes, the Joy-Cons, the detachable controllers that come with every Nintendo Switch. I think it's safe to say over the years they haven't exactly garnered the best reputation, mainly due to the infamous Joy-Con drift that has been an issue for many over the last 4 years. Yes, it really has been 4 years, which has even led to class action lawsuits which have forced Nintendo into offering free repairs for anyone afflicted. Drift problems aside, however, I do think that the Joy-Cons are fairly decent controllers. Not as good as the Pro Controller, of course, but they get the job done, and I do enjoy using them for games like Breath of the Wild. So that of course brings us to the Switch Pro, and will they be updating the Joy-Cons in any significant way? You know, outside of maybe finally fixing drift. Well, there was a patent filed showcasing a new Joy-Con design with a D-pad instead of the arrow buttons, and the return of the circle pad from the 3DS in place of the thumbstick, although their placements on the controller are swapped for some reason. Regardless though, assuming this ends up actually coming to fruition at some point, I don't think it'll be the Joy-Cons included with the Switch Pro. Why? Because the circle pad is technically a downgrade from the normal thumbstick, so it'd be really weird to include a quote-unquote downgraded Joy-Con with your upgraded Switch, even if it didn't suffer from the drift issue, which is why I assume they brought back the circle pad in the first place. Now sure, I could maybe see them selling this as a new Joy-Con variant, maybe even launching alongside the Switch Pro, but as the default option included with it, I highly doubt it personally. It would just seem really weird to me. Personally, I think the Joy-Cons we get with the Switch Pro are going to be more or less the same as what we have now, just with some under the hood changes to better combat drifting, but that's about it. Next up is the core guts of the Switch Pro, that of course being the upgraded SoC, which in the Switch's case of course is the NVIDIA Tegra. Now this one in particular is actually very interesting, not just because it lays the framework for how much more capable the new system will be over its predecessor, but also because the current Tegra that's used in both the current Switch and the Switch Lite, the Tegra X1, is reportedly being discontinued by NVIDIA later this year, which of course would be a problem if Nintendo wants to keep selling their existing Switch models. My guess is that Nintendo will, if they haven't already, be making a deal with NVIDIA to keep production of the X1 going exclusively just for them. Regardless though, that only affects the current Switches, not the Switch Pro, as the new system will be receiving some upgraded Tegra. The question is, which one? Well, there have been no shortage of rumors when it comes to this one, ranging from a minor revision of the X1 to a next generation Tegra powered by NVIDIA's upcoming Lovelace architecture. Personally, I don't think it's either, as just having the X1, I think, still defeats the purpose of a Switch Pro existing at all, and I don't think it's going to be the Lovelace one, because there is no way in hell that Nintendo is going to pick that for the Switch Pro, as it would cost too much to manufacture, and therefore would raise the price of the console too much, and Nintendo doesn't go for the bleeding edge anyway. I think the most likely option going around is probably a custom version of Xavier, which would provide double the performance of the X1 without breaking the bank. It would also contain 8 gigs of RAM, double the current Switch as well. Most importantly, however, this customized Xavier supposedly will be bringing the Switch Pro its biggest feature, that being NVIDIA's DLSS technology. And if you know what DLSS is, then you will know this is absolutely huge for the Switch Pro, as it would allow for developers to render their games at 1080p or lower, as they do now, and then use DLSS to hit a very convincing 4K that some would argue is actually better than native resolution with relatively few resources. There is, however, one little catch, and that is supposedly DLSS will only be implemented in upcoming releases such as Breath of the Wild 2, Splatoon 3, and when it eventually comes out in 2045, Metroid Prime 4. And existing games will most likely not be patched to support it, which if true is a real shame, as there are definitely games right now that could use it, like the Xenoblade games that currently only run at 720p, and of course being able to play other existing games such as Mario Odyssey, Smash Ultimate, or the original Breath of the Wild in 4K would be sweet as well. But that seems to not be in the cards, at least for now. DLSS support is by far the biggest thing I want to see on the Switch Pro, as someone that has a 4K monitor, and it sounds like it is indeed happening, which of course has me super hyped. But of course, we will just have to wait and see if it really does end up being true. I know this isn't necessarily hardware related, but it is something that I know would matter to a lot of people, and it is something that has been rumored. Yes, for those that don't know, there is a rumor claiming that the Switch Pro may indeed be getting exclusives similar to what we saw on the new 3DS. That actually would not surprise me at all, as third-party devs are already squeezing whatever little power out of the Switch that they can as is, and we've already seen some of the more demanding games such as Control and Hitman 3 come to the Switch as cloud-only games as a result. So third-party devs making some of their games Switch Pro exclusives would make a lot of sense, as they need all the power they can get, and I think it would be totally understandable to most people. I don't think, however, that Nintendo is going to be making any of their games exclusive to the Switch Pro, as for the most part, they run fine on the current Switch as is, and they would be losing out on millions of potential sales from their existing install base that they've already built up. So yeah, I don't think anyone needs to worry about Breath of the Wild 2 or Prime 4 being exclusive to the Switch Pro or anything like that. But of course, those games will run and look best on Switch Pro, but I guarantee you they'll be fine on the current Switch as well. Finally, let's go over a few smaller things that we haven't talked about yet before wrapping this video up. First is Bluetooth support, which is something people have been wanting since launch and may be coming to both not only the Switch Pro, but maybe even the current Switch as well, as in the recent Switch update 12.0, they added new drivers that could potentially allow for Bluetooth audio support, but I should put a big emphasis on maybe, as there is currently no support for this new driver, but it would be weird for Nintendo to add this in and do literally nothing with it, so we'll just have to wait and see if that amounts to anything in the future. Then of course there is the price, which by all accounts is going to be $400, which does not surprise me literally at all, as I have been predicting that price tag for years, and it would slide right in alongside the existing lineup of the Switch Lite at $200 and the regular Switch at $300. That being said, however, a $400 price tag for the Switch Pro would be a bit awkward, as you could get a PS5 digital edition for the same price, or at least you could if they were actually in stock, so I'm guessing Nintendo isn't too worried about that at the moment. Then again, who knows if you'll even be able to get a Switch Pro either. Hopefully you will, but I guess we can just have to wait and see how that goes. Finally is probably the most important question regarding the Switch outside the specs, and that of course is, when is it going to be released? Well, going off of Nintendo's last few refresh announcements, I think the Switch Pro will most likely be announced sometime in the summer, most likely in July or August, as its own standalone reveal, like the new 2DS XL and Switch Lite were, with a release date of sometime in September. However, if Breath of the Wild 2 does come out this year, then I think it's very likely that the Switch Pro will launch alongside it, which in that case, of course, it would release in November instead. So those are my thoughts on what the Switch Pro may be offering us later this year. So, what do you all expect to see from the Switch Pro? Do you think it's going to be the big upgrade it's been built up to be? Or do you think we're all getting hyped up for nothing and it's just going to be a minor revision? I'd like to see what you all want to see from this elusive console down below. And with that being said, this is Logan589XP, and I'll see you guys next time.